Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she crouched behind a rock, her wide eyes scanning the dark forest around her. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Her breath came in sharp gasps, and she tried to calm herself. Her fingers, slick with sweat, tightened around the weapon she had been trained to use, though she had never imagined she would have to rely on it in such a place. Zara, a young alien from the planet Novaris, had always been taught to value strength, intelligence, and the will to survive. But now, alone on a strange world, she questioned everything. She had been part of an exploration team, sent to investigate a mysterious, uncharted planet. They had expected to find ancient ruins, hidden knowledge, maybe even new allies. What they had found instead was far more dangerous. The monsters. Her team had been ambushed by them, creatures unlike anything Zara had ever seen. Tall and muscular, with glowing eyes and sharp, clawed limbs, the monsters seemed to come from the very shadows. They were relentless, hunting them down one by one. Zara had fought with all her might, but in the end, she was left behind. The others had taken the ship, escaping without her, leaving her to face the horrors of the planet alone. Zara's mind raced. Why did they leave me? She had always been strong. She had always been quick. She had always been one of the best. Yet here she was, alone and afraid, surrounded by creatures that knew how to hunt. They could smell fear, she was sure of it. The thought of being captured by them sent a chill down her spine. She had heard the stories, seen the horrors in the ruins left behind by those who hadn't been so lucky. There was no way she could fight them all off. Her energy was running low, her supplies were almost gone, and she knew that if she didn't get out of there soon, it would be over. A sudden sound to her left made her freeze. Her eyes snapped to the source, a large bush rustling, its branches shaking as though something was moving through it. She held her breath. The creatures had learned to be silent when they stalked their prey. She couldn't afford to make a sound. Not now. Her body tensed, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. "Stay calm, Zara. You can do this," she told herself. She adjusted her stance, preparing to run, ready to take a leap into the unknown if it meant survival. Then the sound grew louder, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Too fast, too large. A shadow stretched across the ground, and in a flash, a creature with glowing eyes lunged from the underbrush. Zara didn't hesitate. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its claws as they slashed through the air where she had just been. The monster growled, its body twisting with unnatural speed as it turned to face her. Zara's heart raced, but she didn't let fear control her. She raised her weapon, aiming carefully. The laser beam fired, striking the creature in the side. It recoiled but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a loud echoing roar that shook the trees. More sounds followed, more growls, more movement. She wasn't alone anymore. The other creatures had heard the call. "I have to move," Zara thought, her mind spinning with options. She couldn't fight them all. Her energy was too low, and there were too many. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let them catch her. Not like this. With her heart racing, Zara took off, her legs pumping as she sprinted through the thick forest. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, and branches snapped in her path, but she barely noticed. The adrenaline in her veins pushed her faster, her eyes focused on the small clearing up ahead. Maybe she could find higher ground, a place where the monsters couldn't easily reach her. But as she neared the clearing, her foot caught on something, roots, or maybe a rock, and she tumbled forward. For a brief, terrible moment, Zara's vision blurred. She hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of her. The pain was sharp, but she didn't have time to feel it. She rolled onto her back just as the first monster emerged from the trees, its teeth bared, its eyes burning with hunger. Zara scrambled to her feet, but her legs were unsteady. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep running. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and for the first time since arriving on this planet, Zara felt a wave of hopelessness. The monster advanced, its claws stretching toward her, but then, in a flash of motion, something changed. The ground trembled beneath her, and the trees around her shook violently. Zara's heart skipped a beat as she heard the unmistakable sound of more footsteps, larger, more purposeful. She turned her head, her eyes widening in shock. A figure, tall and armored, appeared in the clearing, moving with the kind of purpose Zara hadn't seen in days. And in the instant she saw him, Zara knew she wasn't alone anymore. Zara's eyes widened in disbelief as the figure stepped into the clearing. It was a human, a tall man in a heavy armored suit, with a helmet that hid most of his face. The armor shimmered in the dim light of the planet's twin moons, making him seem like a glowing shadow. For a moment, Zara wondered if she had imagined him, but then the figure moved forward, his steps confident and purposeful. The human didn't hesitate. He raised a weapon, something sleek and advanced, yet familiar, and aimed it at the monster that had been stalking her. The creature, startled by the new threat, growled low in its throat, but the human didn't flinch. He fired. The blast hit the monster square in the chest, and it let out a pained roar before collapsing to the ground. Zara's heart was still racing, but now it was from shock. She had heard stories of humans, but seeing one in person, especially in such a dire situation, was beyond anything she had expected. The creature that had been moments away from killing her now lay motionless, its glowing eyes dark. The human didn't wait. Without a word, he turned to Zara, his expression hidden behind the reflective surface of his helmet. She felt a strange mix of relief and caution. She didn't know if she could trust him. The stories she had heard about humans didn't always paint a kind picture. But right now, he was her only chance. "Are you all right?" The human's voice crackled through his helmet's communication system, his tone calm and controlled. It wasn't the voice of someone who had just fought off a monster. It was the voice of someone used to danger, used to being in control. Zara stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to depending on anyone, least of all a human. But the fear in her chest was slowly being replaced by a tiny spark of hope. This human had saved her life, and that meant something. I'm fine," Zara managed to say, her voice shaky. She took a cautious step back, trying to distance herself from the still smoking body of the monster. The human nodded, his movements swift and practiced as he scanned their surroundings. Zara had only moments to observe him closely before he turned to face her again. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame that suggested strength, but also agility. His armor was covered in scratches and dents, signs of someone who had been in many battles. "My name is David," he said, his voice now a little softer. "I'm here to get you off this planet. Are you ready to leave?" Zara blinked, the question surprising her. She had never considered leaving. She had always thought she would have to survive on her own, that she could find a way to escape or fight back. But now, with the immediate danger gone, the idea of leaving seemed so simple. I don't know," she replied, her gaze shifting to the wreckage of the monster's body. "I've been alone for so long, I thought I could do it myself." David tilted his head slightly, his posture relaxed but alert. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," he said gently. "I'm here to help." Zara felt a strange warmth in his words, though she wasn't sure what to make of it. She had never needed help before, but the thought of having someone beside her, it was both comforting and unsettling. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, especially a human, yet there was something about David's presence, his calm demeanor, that made her feel less alone in that moment. David continued, "I've been tracking your signal for days. You've been through a lot, and I don't blame you for trying to survive on your own. But this planet, it's not safe. It's not just the monsters. There are other dangers here, things we're not even sure about yet. You've done well to stay alive this long." Zara's mind raced. She didn't know if she could trust him, but something about his words felt sincere. He wasn't just here to rescue her. He seemed to understand what it was like to be alone, to face impossible odds. "I'm not sure if I'm ready to leave," Zara said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have so much I need to do. My people." David gave her a soft smile, though it was hidden behind his helmet. "I understand. But sometimes surviving means knowing when to accept help. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Zara hesitated. She had always been taught to be independent, to rely on no one but herself. But in that moment, standing in the moonlit clearing with a human who had just risked his life to save her, she realized something. Perhaps survival wasn't just about strength. It was also about trust. "I've seen what these creatures can do," Zara said, her voice steadying. "They were hunting me, tracking me. I don't know how much longer I can survive here." David nodded. "We'll get you out. Don't worry. But first, we need to get to higher ground. I've got a ship waiting, but the monsters have been spreading out. We can't stay here much longer." Zara finally nodded, her resolve returning. The fear hadn't completely gone, but she was no longer facing it alone. With David by her side, maybe she stood a chance after all. Zara followed David through the thick forest, her every step cautious. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch longer with each passing moment, and though the danger from the monsters had passed for now, a sense of unease still gripped her. She had been alone for so long, trusting only herself to survive. Now, for the first time, she was walking with someone else, someone she barely knew, yet had just saved her life. David walked ahead, his movements sure and confident. His armored suit made little noise as he moved, and Zara couldn't help but notice how focused he was, constantly scanning their surroundings. His eyes darted from side to side, watching for any sign of movement. Despite his calm exterior, Zara could sense the alertness in him, like a hunter waiting for the next threat to appear. It made her feel safer, though a part of her still struggled to fully trust him. "Are you all right?" David asked over his shoulder, his voice steady. "You've been through a lot." Zara glanced at him, unsure how to answer. She had been through so much, but now that she wasn't alone, she found herself at a loss for words. She wasn't used to sharing her feelings, let alone trusting a human so quickly. But something about David made her feel like she could open up, even if just a little. "I'm fine," she said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "I just haven't had anyone to talk to for a long time." David nodded, not pressing her further. Instead, he pointed ahead. "We need to keep moving. The monsters are drawn to sound, so we can't stop for too long." Zara's thoughts flashed back to the nightmarish creatures that had been hunting her. They were fast and terrifying, but she had managed to evade them for weeks. She had thought she could handle everything on her own. But now, with David by her side, she realized how much easier it was to move forward with someone else. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. As they walked, Zara couldn't help but notice the landscape around her. The forest, while thick and dark, had a strange beauty. Giant trees towered above them, their roots twisting and curling like ancient serpents. Bioluminescent plants dotted the ground, their soft glow providing an eerie light in the darkness. It was a planet full of mystery and danger, and Zara knew that she would never have understood its true nature on her own. "How did you find me?" Zara asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "I've been hiding for so long. No one should have been able to track me here." David's eyes flicked to her for a moment before he looked back at the path ahead. "I've been using a tracker. You were sending a signal when you first landed. I picked it up a few days ago. You weren't alone when you first arrived, were you?" Zara hesitated. She didn't want to dwell on the memories of her team, how they had abandoned her, how they had left her behind to face the monsters alone. The pain of betrayal still stung, but she knew it was something she would have to deal with in time. "No," she said quietly, her voice heavy. "I wasn't. But I am now." David didn't respond right away, but his tone softened when he spoke again. "I'm sorry that happened to you. You deserve better than that." Zara blinked, not expecting his kindness. She had always been taught that emotions were a weakness, that showing vulnerability was something to be avoided. But David's words felt genuine, and for the first time in a long while, Zara felt like she wasn't just a survivor. She was a person, with hopes and fears, just like anyone else. "I didn't think I needed anyone," Zora admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I could handle everything on my own. But now, I don't know. Maybe I was wrong." David looked back at her, offering her a reassuring smile through his helmet. "It's not weakness to need help. It's strength to admit it." Zora looked down at the ground, deep in thought. She had always been proud of her independence, but she was beginning to realize that there was more to survival than just strength. Perhaps, for once, it was okay to lean on someone else. The journey felt long as they moved through the dense forest, but Zara followed without hesitation. The path was rough, with roots and branches making the way difficult, but David's steady presence kept her going. Every so often, they would stop to rest for a few minutes, and during those brief pauses, Zara found herself listening to the quiet hum of the planet around them. The strange sounds of the wildlife, the rustling of leaves, and the soft breeze that passed through the trees. It was a reminder that, despite the dangers, there was still beauty in this world. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they reached a small clearing at the edge of the forest. In the distance, Zara saw a sleek metallic ship, David's ship. It gleamed in the moonlight, a stark contrast to the wildness of the planet they had just crossed. Zara's heart lifted at the sight of it, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of hope. David stopped and turned to face her. "We made it. We'll be safe there. For now, anyway." Zora looked at the ship, then back at David. She felt a mix of emotions, relief, uncertainty, and even a little fear. She had come so far, but the journey wasn't over yet. She knew there was still much to face, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. And with that, they made their way toward the ship, the path ahead uncertain, but no longer terrifying. Together, they would face whatever came next. As Zara and David approached the ship, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. The sleek, silver ship gleamed in the dim moonlight, its engines humming quietly. It looked like something out of a dream, something Zara had only ever seen in old holo recordings. The promise of safety, of escape, felt closer than ever, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead still lingered in her mind. David led the way, walking confidently toward the ship's ramp. Zara followed, her thoughts racing. How had she ended up here? Just a few weeks ago, she had been part of a team, sent to explore a new world, full of hope and purpose. But now, everything had changed. She had lost her comrades, faced terrifying monsters, and spent days alone in the wilderness, fighting to survive. And yet, here she was, walking toward a ship with a human who had just rescued her. It felt surreal. The ship's ramp lowered with a soft hiss, and David stepped inside first, turning to gesture for Zara to follow. "Welcome aboard," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Zara hesitated for a moment, then stepped onto the ship. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the warmth of the ship's interior wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. It was a sharp contrast to the cold and harsh environment of the planet they had just left behind. The walls were smooth and metallic, and the air inside was clean and fresh, a stark reminder of the comfort she had lost during her time on the planet. "Take a seat," David instructed, pointing to a seat near the wall. "We'll be leaving soon." Zara nodded and walked over to the seat, still feeling out of place in the advanced environment. She wasn't used to the high-tech, polished surroundings, but she was grateful for the safety it promised. As she sat down, David moved to the control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons and switches with practiced ease. He was completely at home in the ship, and Zara couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration for him. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Zara asked, watching as he worked. David glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile on his lips. More times than I can count. I've been all over the galaxy, but every mission is different. Every rescue is different. Zara was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. She had never considered what it might be like to be a rescuer, to save someone else. She had always focused on her own survival, her own struggle to stay alive. But now, as she looked at David, she realized that there was more to this than just getting by. There was something about helping others, about offering a hand when things seemed impossible. It was something she had never fully understood until now. David returned his focus to the control panel and began the process of taking off. Zara felt the ship shift slightly as the engines powered up. The low hum of the ship's engines grew louder, and the ramp closed behind them with a soft hiss. The ship began to rise, leaving the planet's surface behind. Zara pressed her hand against the cool wall, her eyes fixed on the view outside. Through the small window, she watched as the planet shrank beneath them, its surface now a distant memory. The trees, the monsters, the harsh landscape, it all seemed so far away now. She couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, but also sadness. The planet had been her home for so long, even if it had been a place of pain and fear, and now she was leaving it behind for good. As the ship ascended higher into the sky, David spoke again. "We'll be heading to a safe station for now. It's not far, but I'll need to check in with my superiors. I'm sure they'll want a full report on the situation here." Zara nodded, though she didn't entirely understand what he meant. She hadn't been part of any larger operation, any mission that involved others beyond her team. She had always been on her own, isolated from everything else. But now, she found herself part of something bigger, something that might offer a new chance for survival, and maybe even a new purpose. "What happens after the station?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. David looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "We'll figure it out. You're safe for now. That's all that matters. We'll get you to a place where you can rest and recover. After that, we can make a plan." Zara's heart fluttered at the thought of rest. It had been so long since she had truly slept, since she had felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear of what might happen next. The days and nights on the planet had blurred together, each one blending into the next as she fought to survive. The ship continued to rise, the stars growing brighter as they ascended into the vastness of space. Zara watched in awe as the familiar stars began to fill the sky, each one a tiny point of light in the endless black. She had always gazed at the stars with a sense of wonder, but now, with David beside her, the stars seemed to promise something more. Hope, maybe. A new beginning. As the ship soared higher, Zara felt her body relax for the first time in weeks. The tension in her muscles, the constant fear, began to fade. She was still on edge, still uncertain about what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. David glanced over at her, noticing the change in her posture. "You'll be all right," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You're not alone anymore." Zara looked at him, a small, grateful smile forming on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft. David simply nodded, his eyes returning to the stars outside. He didn't need to say anything more. Zara knew that for now, at least, she was safe, and that was enough. The ship cruised through the quiet vastness of space, its engines purring steadily as they moved further away from the dangerous planet. Zara sat quietly in her seat, looking out of the window, her eyes fixed on the stars. The view was beautiful, but her mind kept returning to what had happened on the planet. The monsters, the fear, the loneliness. It all felt like a distant memory now. Yet, Zara couldn't fully shake the feeling of uncertainty. David had told her they would be heading to a safe station, but Zara wasn't sure what to expect. Would the station be like the ship, calm and welcoming? Or would it be another cold, unfamiliar place? She didn't know. All she could do now was wait and hope. As the hours passed, David was busy at the controls, his hands moving over the ship's systems. He occasionally glanced at Zara, sensing her silence, but didn't press her. She was clearly lost in her thoughts, and David respected her need for space. He had seen it before. Survivors of difficult situations often needed time to adjust, to process what they had been through. After a while, Zara broke the silence. "How far is the station?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. David turned in his seat, offering a reassuring smile. "Not far now. We'll be there in a few hours. You should rest if you can. It's been a long journey for you." Zara nodded, though the idea of rest still felt strange to her. She hadn't truly slept for so long. Even on the ship, she kept thinking about what could go wrong, about the dangers she had just escaped. But David's words had an air of calm about them, something that made Zara feel like maybe, just maybe, she could trust this moment. Maybe she could let go of the fear for just a little while. Taking a deep breath, Zara closed her eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. The soft hum of the ship was oddly comforting. It was like being wrapped in a warm blanket, safe from the dangers that had once seemed so overwhelming. Her body finally began to unwind, the tension in her muscles melting away. She must have drifted off to sleep, because when she opened her eyes again, hours had passed, and the ship was much closer to the station. "Zara!" David's voice broke through her light sleep. She opened her eyes, blinking as she tried to adjust to the light. "We're almost there. The station's coming into view." Zara sat up, her heart beating a little faster as she looked out of the window. Far in the distance, she could see a bright light growing larger. It was the station. It looked massive, surrounded by shining solar panels and satellite dishes. It was nothing like the planet she had left behind. This was a place of order, of technology, a place where things made sense. David smiled when he saw the look on Zara's face. "That's it, the safe station. You'll be able to rest here, get a meal, and recover. It's not much, but it's home to a lot of people who are just like us, travelers, explorers, refugees. You'll fit in fine." Zara nodded, her breath catching as she took in the sight of the station. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a person. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a new life here. Maybe she could start over, leave the horrors of the planet behind, and find a way to move forward. As the ship drew closer to the station, Zara felt a wave of emotion rise within her. She had been through so much. The monsters, the loneliness, the constant fight for survival. Those experiences had shaped her. They had made her strong, but they had also left scars. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't do it alone anymore. David guided the ship toward one of the docking bays, his movements smooth and practiced. He knew this station well. As the ship touched down, Zara could feel the gentle vibration of the landing. The doors hissed open, and the ramp descended, revealing the new world for her to explore. Zara stood up, feeling the warmth of the ship still clinging to her, but a new sense of anticipation filling her chest. She was about to step into the unknown again, but this time, she wasn't doing it alone. David was with her, and for the first time, she felt a spark of confidence. Maybe this would be the place where she could finally heal, where she could find some peace. David stepped off the ship first, turning to wait for Zara. "Welcome to the station," he said. "I'll take you to where you can rest. Don't worry, you're safe here." Zara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had been through lifting, even if just a little. She stepped onto the ramp, her foot landing softly on the station's cool floor. The air here was different, cleaner, quieter, filled with the hum of technology. It was a far cry from the chaos she had left behind, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how different this place was. For the first time in a long while, Zara allowed herself to smile. She had made it. She had survived. And now she was ready to begin again. Zara stood in the quiet corridor of the station, looking around at the new world she had just entered. The air was cool and crisp, filled with a soft hum from the station's systems. Bright lights illuminated the hallway, and doors lined both sides, leading to different rooms and areas. It felt different from the chaos of the planet she had escaped. There was a sense of peace here, and Zara couldn't help but feel a small weight lifting off her shoulders. David walked beside her, his presence a comforting constant. He had kept his promise. He had gotten her here safely. And now, she was here, in a place that was safe and filled with possibilities. But Zara was still uncertain. Could she truly start over? Could she leave behind the memories of the monsters, the fear, and the constant struggle for survival? As they walked further down the corridor, David spoke. "You'll be all right here. There's food, rest, and help. If you need anything, just ask." His voice was kind, yet firm, giving Zara a sense of security. Zara nodded, appreciating the reassurance. She wasn't sure how to feel. There were still many questions in her mind, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think about something other than fear and survival. The thought of rest, of food, of simple comfort, it felt like a dream. Could she really allow herself to have those things after everything she had been through? David stopped at a door and pressed a button beside it. The door slid open, revealing a small room with a bed, a desk, and a chair. It was simple but welcoming. "This is your room. Take all the time you need to settle in." Zara stepped inside, her eyes taking in the space. It was small, but there was something about it that made her feel like she could finally relax. She stepped over to the bed and sat down, feeling the softness of the mattress beneath her. It was a feeling she hadn't known in so long. For so many days, she had slept on rocky ground, on makeshift beds, and in places where safety was never guaranteed. But now she was here, safe. She could actually rest. David watched her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll leave you to it for now. Just remember, if you need anything, I'm just a call away." Zara looked up at him, a small smile crossing her face. "Thank you for everything." David smiled back. "It's nothing. Just take care of yourself." As he left the room, Zara lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The quiet of the room felt strange, almost too peaceful after everything she had been through. But it was also exactly what she needed. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, allowing her body and mind to recover. Time seemed to pass slowly, but eventually, Zara sat up, feeling the need to move. She couldn't stay in bed forever, not when there was so much to explore in this new place. She got up and walked over to the window, looking out at the vastness of space. The stars seemed so distant, yet so close at the same time. She wondered what the future held for her here. Could she truly make a new life for herself, away from the planet she had left behind? As she stood there, lost in thought, a soft peep from the door broke her concentration. She turned to see a small panel lighting up, signaling that someone was at the door. She opened it to find a young woman standing there, holding a tray of food. The woman smiled warmly. "Hi," she said in a friendly tone. "I was asked to bring you something to eat. I know it's not much, but I thought you might be hungry after the long journey." Zora looked at the tray, her stomach growling softly. It had been so long since she had eaten a proper meal. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. "Thank you," she said, taking the tray. She smiled at the woman, grateful for the simple kindness. "No problem," the woman replied with a smile. "If you need anything else, just let me know." Zara nodded as the woman left, closing the door behind her. She sat down at the desk, placing the tray in front of her. The food was simple, a small bowl of soup, some bread, and a drink. But to Zara, it was like a feast. She hadn't had something so warm and comforting in so long. With each bite, she felt the tension in her body begin to melt away. As she ate, her thoughts wandered back to the life she had left behind. It seemed like a lifetime ago, everything she had experienced, everything she had lost. But here, in this new place, she had a chance to heal. She had a chance to start over. And maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here, free from the fear that had once consumed her. After finishing her meal, Zara felt a small sense of peace. She wasn't sure where her journey would take her next, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. She was no longer just a survivor. She was someone who could look ahead to the future, someone who could dream of a life beyond the monsters and the darkness. Zara stood up from the desk, looking out the window again. The stars still seemed endless, but now, they felt full of possibility. Zara stood by the window again, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. The stars sparkled brightly, each one telling a story of a faraway world. She had learned to appreciate their beauty, to see them as something more than distant points of light. They were symbols of hope, of new beginnings. They represented the future, a future that was now in her hands. It had been a few days since Zara had arrived at the station. Every day had brought something new, something small but meaningful. She had met more people, each one kind and willing to help. They showed her the ropes, explaining how things worked, where to find what she needed, and offering her advice on how to adapt to this new life. It was a far cry from the dangers of the planet she had come from. The kindness of the people here, especially David, had made her realize just how much she had been missing. For so long she had been alone, fighting for survival, not knowing who she could trust or where to turn for help. But here, in this new world, she was no longer alone. She had people who cared, people who wanted to see her thrive. Zara turned away from the window and looked around her room. The bed was neatly made, the desk clean and tidy. There was a sense of calm here, a sense of order that she hadn't known for a long time. She had learned to appreciate the little things, the quiet moments, the feeling of safety, and the opportunity to rest. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It was a beginning. As she sat down on the bed, her thoughts turned to David. He had been her rock during the journey. From the moment he found her on the edge of the planet, struggling to survive, to the way he had patiently guided her through the strange new world of the station, he had never once left her side. She wasn't sure how to explain it, but there was something about him that made her feel safe, something that made her believe that she could truly start over. She remembered their conversation the other day. David had told her, "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Zara. We're here to help you." His words had stayed with her, reminding her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the past on her own. There were people who wanted to help her, who saw her as more than just a survivor. They saw her as a person with potential, a person who deserved a chance at happiness. Zara smiled at the thought. She hadn't smiled much in the past, but now, it felt natural. It felt good. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she was ready to face it, ready to step into the unknown with hope in her heart. There was a knock at the door. Zara stood up quickly, curious. When she opened it, she found David standing there, a warm smile on his face. "Hey," he said gently. "I wanted to check in on you. How are you feeling today?" Zara smiled back, her heart lifting at the sight of him. "I'm doing well," she said. "It feels strange, in a good way. I'm starting to get used to all of this." David nodded. "That's great to hear. I know it's a big change, but you're doing amazing." Zara felt a wave of gratitude toward him. "Thank you, David. You've done so much for me already. I don't know how I can ever repay you." David shrugged. "You don't have to. Just taking the time to heal, to start fresh. That's enough for me." Zara looked at him, her eyes softening. She knew she owed him so much, but it wasn't just the physical help he had given her. It was his kindness, his willingness to listen, and the way he made her feel like she mattered. For the first time in a long time, Zara felt like she belonged somewhere. David took a step forward. "Listen, there's something I want to show you. It's something special." Zara raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "You'll see," David said with a grin. "Come on, follow me." Curious, Zara followed him out of her room and down the hallway. As they walked, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building within her. What could it be? What was this surprise David had for her? They eventually reached a door at the far end of the station. David paused in front of it, turning to look at her. "Ready?" Zara nodded, her heart racing. "Ready." David pushed open the door, revealing a beautiful, open space beyond. It was a small garden, filled with vibrant flowers and plants, a place of calm and tranquility. The soft sound of water trickled from a small fountain in the corner. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of the flowers. Zara stepped inside, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen anything like it before. This is amazing." David smiled, watching her reaction. "I thought you'd like it. It's a place to relax, to find peace. It's yours to visit whenever you want." Zara stood there, taking it all in. The garden was a symbol of everything she had found here: peace, comfort, and a chance at a new life. She knew that her journey wasn't over, but now it felt like it was just beginning. She turned to David, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. David's smile grew wider. "No thanks needed. You've earned it." Zara looked out at the stars again, feeling the warmth of the garden around her. She had faced so much, but now she had something to look forward to. A new beginning, a future. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free.